Last week I went to Copenhagen. My regional airport happened to be offering cheap flights to Esbjerg, and I've been really interested in discovering Copenhagen's transit system for a while now, and things just kind of fell into place. My aim for this video is to give a review of the Copenhagen transit system based on my experience with it for a week. Talk about things I like, things that transit fans can take from the system, as well as for people looking to visit Copenhagen in future, how you can make the best of it. I think it's good to start with the actual user experience of getting on to use the system. When you get into the city, whether by train or airport, how do you use it? From a visitor perspective, I think you have two options. First, the Rejsekort system is a tap-and-go card that works nationwide on most forms of public transport. People who don't live in Denmark can order an anonymous card, costing 80 krona up front, with you just topping up the cards with money as you go. Rail stations typically have a kiosk or machine you can do that at. This card may be worth it as it gives what I've seen a 20 to 25% discount on tickets, which will eventually pay off the cost of the cards initially. The alternative is the City Pass, a paper ticket which provides unlimited travel within the city for 1 to 5 days each. With the City Pass, you get a choice of small, which is basically where the metro and the inner S-Tog lines go, and large, which covers the entire S-Tog plus some adjacent local lines. These tickets start at 80 krona a day, with the per day price decreasing as you get more days in one. Whether the City Pass or Rejsekort is more worth it is probably dependent on your personal circumstances, including how often you plan to go out of the zone that is covered by the City Passes. So I will recommend researching both. I've linked to some information about fares and zones in the description for ease of access. Denmark's railways, which includes the railways within Copenhagen, are a German-style proof of payment system, so there's no ticket barriers or gates. As long as you have a valid ticket on you, or you tap in and out with your cards before boarding the train, you are free to go wherever, which is good for train spotting. The Copenhagen Metro is fully step-free from street to platform. In many cases, I've even seen lifts go straight from street level straight to the platform. A big advantage of a proof of payment system is that you don't need a mezzanine for ticket barriers. So that's a big plus if you're a user with impaired mobility. The S-Tog isn't as universally accessible, but from what I saw, lift coverage of the station seemed to be pretty solid. And the S-Tog trains are equipped with ramps that train attendants can deploy for wheelchair users. This area of transit accessibility isn't my specialty, but Copenhagen does seem to be more on the accessible end of transit systems I've been to, particularly thanks to its modern metro system. So that's Copenhagen's overall fare system and accessibility, which I'd say is overall leaning towards the positive end of metro systems I've used. One of Copenhagen's big strengths is that it has a good variety of transit systems, each of which serve their own roles, while also being properly integrated into each other. I'll go through each of these systems individually, what you should know about them, and what I think of them personally. The oldest rapid transit system in Copenhagen is the S-Tog, tog being Danish for train. As the name implies, this is kind of like a German S-Bahn system. It was created in the 1930s by electrifying a few local lines and has expanded since then. The S-Tog features a key trunk route through the city centre, which almost all the lines converge on to provide a very high central frequency. There's also the F line, which takes a more orbital route around the city centre. On days and rush hours, these lines often operate in pairs, allowing local and express services to work together. This does mean that accessing the very ends of the line is actually quite fast if you're taking the correct express lines to do so. For example, getting to Hillerød at the end of the A line was quite easy thanks to it running express on most of that line. As a system that dates its origin back to the 1930s, parts of the S-Tog do show their age, although I will say their close integration with nearby streetscapes and other forms of transit does mean that I think it's aged quite well overall. I think the other noteworthy thing about the S-Tog is the very unique design of the trains themselves. They have these very short walk-through carriages with single doors each, alongside a unique wheel system of one bogie per train. I think operations-wise, riding these trains are very similar to other kinds of trains you may ride, but they definitely feel a bit more metro-like compared to the more main lines of German S-Bahn systems that might be equivalent to it. I will also say that the interior of the S-Tog trains feel very late 90s European car. I would not be surprised to discover that Pininfarina had a hand in designing these. But they do have good cycle access as well, which is a big positive since Copenhagen is also quite a cycling-friendly city. Overall, the S-Tog does a good job at both getting you around the city centre and to its outer suburbs. Copenhagen is quite famous for having built much of its suburban areas around the S-Tog system, which has helped it avoid issues with uncontrollable sprawl that many other post-war cities faced, and it's definitely an important part of getting out of the city centre. The much newer addition to Copenhagen is the metro. The first two lines, the M1 and M2, opened in 2003, going through the city centre to the airport, as well as some developing areas, plus a former S-Tog line. The metro is a fully automated system that runs at very high frequencies. I saw about every 4 minutes seem to be standards for each line, and since there's a significant amount of overlap on the system, a train every 2 minutes can be expected at most stops. The second part of the system opened in 2019 with the City Ringen, which goes around the city centre. A future extension is currently under construction for the Line 4, and I will discuss that later in this video. I think one of the impressive things about the Copenhagen Metro was definitely its frugality. I wouldn't say it's about on the level of copy and paste in stations as, say, Torino was, but I was definitely impressed with how uniform the stations were. Almost all of them are built cut and cover methods with like big escalators going straight to the platform level. And despite that, it never felt totally uniform, which I quite enjoyed. The metro is a very good option for short distance journeys around the city. And although I think its coverage of the city centre could maybe improved a bit, I would overall say it's a very good stress-free option for getting around, especially thanks to its high frequencies. My personal shout out is to the station of Sundby, which serves kind of a preserved area of nature right next to it. These kinds of new transit options to nature are always glad to see. Before I go on to the remainder of the sections, a quick intermission. During my trip to Copenhagen, I also took the opportunity to visit two brand new tram systems that were within travel distance of Copenhagen. One in Odense, Denmark, and the other in Lund, Sweden. I will be making a separate video on those very soon, so stay tuned. I certainly have a lot to say about them individually. Next on my list of things to talk about is one that kind of surprised me. The 5C City Line. Copenhagen has good buses in general, with a mix of local and express services with their respective line designations. But I want to dedicate this section to one bus in particular. People need to stop sleeping on the 5C City Line bus. It's maybe the best single bus service I've ever used. It goes from Copenhagen Airport to Herlev Hospital, passing straight through the city centre. This bus hits off multiple rail interchanges and places of interest, runs at an extremely impressive frequency of 5 minutes, in my experience a bit less than that. And I think it covers the gap in the Metro C centre coverage quite well. The buses they use are specific for the 5C City Line and a commute spec with multiple doors for fast boarding and unloading. By some measures I've seen, it's the busiest bus service in Scandinavia. Despite all of that, it's a really simple bus with no big BRT gimmicks. It feels like some kind of transit miracle. The City Line, in my opinion, deserves to be on the Metro map. Maybe it needs a bit of a redesign to accommodate it, but maybe when the lap lane opens. I strongly recommend that you keep the 5C in mind when you visit Copenhagen. It's an extremely useful service that will definitely help if you go through the city centre at any point. Next up, the local tug. This is a private rail company that operates several non-electrified regional lines around Zealand. I think most notably the several lines that emanate from the northern town of Hillerød, the termini of the A line of the S-Tog. Most of these lines use Alstom links, and despite their quiet, rural and often single-track character, these trains have a solid 30-minute frequency throughout the day. I love the local tog for giving a completely different feel from the bustle of commuting elsewhere on the island. I certainly recommend a day of just roaming around the local tog network if that interests you, or you like getting out to some quiet coastal towns, of which it does serve many. I don't see a lot of these local lines that stay through towns and have stops so closely integrated into their surroundings in the UK, so I always enjoy seeing these types of European local railways whenever I travel. My pro tip is that some of the local tog's quieter stations are request stops, and you call for trains via these buttons on the platforms. Keep that in mind so you don't miss your train. Otherwise, if you are a trains and nature fan, I would recommend taking a ride between Hillerød and Græsted. It goes straight through a protected forest with a few stops within it, and it's a great way of getting to nature from transit. Finally, Copenhagen is served by the major railway network too, and it's easy to reach both Sweden and the rest of Denmark from it. For local operations, the national railway operator, DSB, operates some regional express branded services that serve commuter and regional travel around the city. They're operated, in my experience, via these Doppelstockwagen and Siemens Vectron combos. These Doppelstockwagens, to my knowledge, are virtually identical to the German ones. The most notable route for these is probably the coastal line to Helsingør. There's a cheap ferry between Helsingør and the Swedish city of Helsingborg across the Sound, and it's a unique way to get to Sweden if you want to travel for a day. This line is included within the large city pass, so you can take advantage of that. The alternate method of getting to Sweden is by the Öresundståg, which has frequent departures from Copenhagen Central Station and goes to a surprisingly wide net of Swedish cities. I personally went to Lund via it. It was a direct journey and it was hassle-free. You will need to get tickets for these. These are not comparable with the Rejsekort, but it does get you to get across one of the most unique border crossings in the world. My other tip is that this train stops at the airport, and so it's actually a solid makeshift airport express from there to the city if you don't want to take the metro or the city line there. I think that's everything that exists now, but I'm also happy to report that Copenhagen is making some good transit investments and expansions in the future. So let's have a look at what's next for the city in the coming years. The S-Tog has two main upgrades on the table. The first being a switch to digital signalling with an aim for automating it. Very recently, the system has implemented digital signalling on parts of the system, which has been able to increase frequency, and this service will undoubtedly expand as the years go on. The second, more obvious upgrade is a brand new station on the A line named Faberholm. This will be an interchange station between the S-Tog and local Tog, and it's being built to serve a brand new town, most notably featuring an adjacent, now under construction hospital. Another big upgrade that's happening is over with the metro, as the M4 line is getting an expansion. I got the chance to walk the length of the line while I was in Copenhagen. This branches off the current terminus at Copenhagen Central, serving many new stations with destinations such as this shopping centre and many large and developing residential districts before terminating at the to-be-upgraded railway station of New Elleberg. What really impressed me with exploring these station locations was the scale of the development at them that already exists. Lots of dense apartment buildings and ground floor businesses, most of which is brand new, but also one spot near the terminus at Mozartplatz, which isn't as new. I'm surprised that this will be the kind of place we'll consider for a brand new metro stop, but it should tie old and new together. I think this metro extension will have plenty of ridership from the moment it opens, thanks to its transit-oriented development being effectively pre-built. Copenhagen in general is very good at developing land around transit. You can expect mixed density around most stops, and the urban realm around stations are very pleasant to be around, with lots of bike parking and amenities nearby. Bit of a tangent here, but I think Denmark's secret sauce for good transit-oriented development is the fact that a land value tax is a key part of its taxation policy. In short, properties are taxed based on the intrinsic traits of its undeveloped land rather than the traits of the property itself. This means that an apartment building with ground-level pizza and kebab shops will be required to pay the same land value tax as if that same plot of land was empty and derelict. This creates a self-enforcing incentive to develop land next to transit stations. The existence of a stop raises the land value tax. Developers need to build 7-Elevens on the land to take advantage of it. And if they don't want to, then there's a massive incentive to sell the land to a developer who actually does want to do something with it. As a result, Copenhagen feels like a city with absolutely no wasted space, and its transit benefits greatly from it. I know this video isn't about the virtues of Georgism, but transit fans should keep land value tax and its success in Copenhagen in mind when considering how to make transit-oriented development elsewhere work. Finally, shout out to the mural on the work wall around Engave Brig, depicting the evolution of humankind or something. Art to cover up construction is never usually this beautiful, and I want to say I had a blast walking about it. Good job. And now the big one. Copenhagen is built in an orbital tram line. This kind of thing is something that Nordic countries have been a big fan of recently. Stockholm and Helsinki are both doing them. I took a chance to explore the line's construction for myself to get an idea as to how interesting the Letbane will be. Importantly, this line interchanges with a range of S-Tog branches. The orbital mobility part of the line is likely its most important trait, serving the increasing number of journeys that don't go from the edge of the city into the city centres. Building up more mini downtowns throughout a metropolitan area is good, and this line will help create that, getting people to the S-Tog hubs rather than straight into the city. At the southern end, at Isoj, we can see the island platform that the trains will terminate at. Notice how the road crossing parts seem complete. Getting the most disruptive part of the build done first is a general trend across this construction project. Going to the next stop, we can see that they will still be using traditional gravel ballast for the more rural sections of the route. This stop serves a nearby major apartment complex for people travelling north. The Letbane will complement the existing 300S bus line, which runs along a very similar route along the Orfrey Road and is among the busiest lines in the city. Hopping on it, I head to Gladach's traffic plants, arguably the hub of this line. It features an interesting track arrangement with 3 platforms accessed via a small branch. From what I understand, all trams will use this station and reverse out to continue the service. There are 2 lines that both terminate here. It's an interesting layout that I've never really seen be replicated elsewhere, and reversing makes it a bit functionally complicated. But I will notice that it's still a more direct route to the station compared to what the 300s currently takes. Here's a view from underneath the viaduct it goes on, where you can see the old and new bridges together. Going to the end of the line, I enjoyed seeing how much of the track on this area outside the urban areas were already laid. The north end goes away from the Orfrey Road and through Lyngby, where we get a good look at the on-street running part through the shopping centre. Probably the major reason why this is a tram line as opposed to a new metro. This line also goes straight through the Denmark Technical University campus. I'm a bit surprised that this part isn't as far along as elsewhere on the line, and would think that a uni campus with its off-term time and low traffic would make this go a bit faster, but this is what it looks like right now. The final 2 stops run right between the university and a highway. Side note, I love this express bus service that branches just slightly off the highway to stop here. It's a really clever little use of highway infrastructure and a great interchange when the Letbane comes to complement it. But that's for Letbane. I think it will be a well-used line, not just because of the 300S legacy, but because it covers an important, well-used orbital route interchanging with many existing transit services and going to many developing downtowns in place of note along the way. Including a hospital. I think every transit line in Copenhagen seems to go through a hospital at some point. I look forward to seeing this complete and something I can ride in a few years. Overall, Copenhagen is a great transit and biking city. It has many different modes, all of which complement each other while serving their own niches really well. It's a city I highly recommend for transit fans, and if you are just visiting the city without being a transit fan, I think it's one that you will get great use out of, and I hope this video gave you a bit of an idea of what to expect, both now and in the future. Hope you enjoyed watching.